As many of you know, my all-time favorite stories to read are the classic skin-crawling ghost stories. Today, I have compiled some truly creepy ghost stories sent in by subscribers. All of these stories come from overseas, from the ancient and sometimes freaky continent of Europe. Many subscribers from various countries shared their allegedly true, creepy ghost stories for you guys to enjoy. If you have a story you would like to share, whether it be from Europe or somewhere else, be sure to submit it at swampdweller.net or the email you can find in the description down below. I would love to share your story. It's stories like yours that keep this channel going. Joining me today is my good friend Celestial Noor. He has been reading scary stories for quite a long time, and has a large catalog of videos I know you will all enjoy. So, if you haven't yet, be sure to subscribe to his channel if you enjoy his reading today. You can find a link to do so in the description down below. Now, let's get into these allegedly true, creepy European ghost stories. This might not be as scary as some of the other stories I've heard on this channel, and could literally be anything. But I figured I'd share it in hopes that someone else has had a similar experience in northern Sweden. My name's Amelia, and I spent a fair amount of my childhood in the small village of Sundmacka in northern Sweden. It's only populated by 100 people tops, most of them only using the houses as summer cabins. It's an everybody knows everybody kind of place. We'd spend our days riding around on four-wheelers and exploring the woods, so we knew the place pretty well. I even lived there when our apartment was being renovated. Anyway, at first, I and the fellow kids in our family thought the house was haunted. The guest room was always weird. It had this weird vibe to it, and nobody, not even the house's residents, slept well in it. Most agreed it felt like they were being watched. My cousin once ran from the room crying to sleep with me and my mom, even though her mom and sibling were sleeping with her in that room. It was the only room without curtains or blinds. I never opened the curtains at night because I was scared of the dark, and it felt like I'd see the face of a ghost pressed up against it if I ever did. Most of the kids agreed with me. As we grew older and overnight stays became less and less frequent, those things stopped bothering me as much. That is, until a few years ago. My cousin and I were riding on a four-wheeler, following a river that split the forest. The side we were on was trailed and populated, and the other side was untamed wilderness. Hunters would occasionally go there, but there really weren't any footpaths or anything for hikers to take if they wanted to. So as far as we knew, it was empty. We stopped by the side of the river to take a break, when this loud, ear-piercing scream made us both jump. It was shrill and raspy at the time. I don't know how to even describe it, other than it just sounded off. I don't want to be the superstitious person who thinks they can feel ghosts and evil, but this scream brought some sort of intense dread with it. At first, we were just startled, but as we replayed the scream in our minds, we decided to get out of there as fast as we possibly could. Our parents told us it was just foxes or people, so I and my cousin kind of forgot about it. That was until I started reading about skinwalkers and other terrifying stories of beasts that lurk in forests. I listened to the screams of foxes and similar animals, but nothing sounded like what we heard. It echoed loud and clear and left a ringing in our ears. Maybe my mind is playing it up, but when I asked my cousin if she remembers, she describes the scream in the same way. It was just wrong, not like any human. Not like any human I've ever heard anyway, and I've worked as a nurse, so I've heard just about everything from a newborn shriek to the screams of a person with severe Alzheimer's. Now, I'm starting to wonder if our fear of looking out the windows at night in the curtainless room's unpleasantness has something to do with skinwalkers or some sort of banshee or ghost. I'm not a strong believer, so this won't keep me from driving through those woods again, but I'll definitely listen closely the next time I go out there. We've never experienced knocking on the door, or voices coming from the woods or anything like that, and with all that said, I'll always be cautious now while in the woods.
I'm from Europe, Lithuania. I'm a 27-year-old male, and I came from the smallest city to the capital, Vilnius, some years back. Let's start from the beginning. I came to the capital when I found a good job, so I needed a place to live. I was looking for some rental apartments and I found one. It was in a very, very bad neighborhood. In my house lived a lot of ex-prisoners, drug addicts, and people who were almost homeless. Adding to this, the house was around 200 meters from the place where gypsies are living. All they do around here is criminal stuff like robbing and selling drugs. All in all, a very bad place to live. So I contacted the number of an apartment owner who was renting it for a long time, and we agreed to meet near the house to look at the place, and if I liked it, I'd sign the papers. I met with the guy, walked up to the 4th floor, and we stood by the door. I noticed that on my door was a sticker. This sticker means that firefighters had to break in. I asked the owner why the sticker was on the door, and he said, one time, when no one was living in that apartment, neighbors called the police because they were starting to smell something coming from the apartment. So the firefighters broke into the apartment through the window, but found nothing. Well, I kind of believed this story, but it was weird. We walked inside, and it was just like new. Floors, wall, ceiling, shower, toilet. It was like it was all new. Liking the place, I signed the papers, and I rented the apartment. I have to mention that this apartment was extra small. There was a kitchen sink, fridge, toilet, shower, and a place to live, but it was only 11 square meters, 36 square feet. I had no friends in that city and no girlfriend, so I thought this is a place to start my life. The entire time living there, however, I felt weird, like something was watching me. I was always depressed, almost suicidal at points. Now, fast forward 10 months. I already had a girlfriend, and my friend from a smaller city came to Vilnius. They were trying to find a job and someplace to live. I decided to give him an easy start. I moved to my girlfriend's apartment, and I let my friend live in my rental apartment. He was broke, so that's all I could do for him. He had it easy. He didn't even have to pay the rent. After a week, he told me that something was wrong with the apartment. He wasn't a depressed sort of dude. He's always fun to be around and always upbeat. That said, he told me that in that apartment, he was feeling very depressed and suicidal. Actually, he tried to kill himself with his belt and the radiator, but there was too little space to do that. After that incident, he tried to avoid that place. He would party all night or stay somewhere else. One day, he wasn't able to find a girl to stay for the night, or to stay at the bar all night. So he came to the apartment around 1:30 a.m. Around 2 a.m., he started smelling an awful smell. He described the smell like rotting flesh. And suddenly the entire apartment was freezing. He was sitting in the dark, ready to go to sleep, when he noticed a small bubble of light floating in the apartment. He was watching it until it sank into the toilet. After that, he borrowed some money from his friends, rented an apartment for himself, and never went there again. I came back from my girlfriend's apartment and was trying to be calm. I was a very heavy sleeper, but I liked to go to bed around 2 a.m. I smelled the same smell as well, and I could feel the same cold, but I tried not to look anywhere. Later, I smelled it, sometimes 4 times a week. Eventually, I stopped renting this place, and I went to my friend's new rental apartment, and we became roomies. Sometimes, I still think about that apartment. I feel really strange about it. I believe that somebody may have died in there. I now live in another place, where I actually feel good.
My story takes place in a town in the far Russian east called Artyom. a town in many ways that is still stuck in Soviet times, as is evident from the Lenin statue that overlooks the central square in the drab old apartment blocks. When people think of Russia, they think of beautiful domed churches and of the Red Square. That's Moscow, some 9,000 kilometers away to the west. Nope, I live in Primorsky Krai, home of the Siberian tiger, and bordering China and North Korea. Many people wonder what a guy like me, originally from the backwoods, NASCAR-loving redneck Alabama, is doing so far from home in such a place. Well, I'm an English teacher and have lived and worked in Russia since 2013. The town is depressing, but the money is good. I was looking for an adventure, and by God, I found one. So, enough of the backstory. I've had experiences dating to almost 2 years ago that began after I moved to this post-communist paradise, quote-unquote. My story begins on a seemingly normal night in April of 2017. I was sleeping soundly when I was suddenly awakened at around 3 a.m. by a knock on the door of my apartment. My first thought was that some local criminals figured out an American lived there and wanted to rob me. It wouldn't have been the first time I've dealt with these type of people. I'm quite conspicuous due to the lack of foreigners here, so word gets around. It doesn't help that my face and name are plastered all over TV and billboard advertisements for the school where I work. Anyway, I got up and looked out the peephole, and was in shock to see 2 little girls, maybe around 10 years old, standing on the landing. I cracked the door open and asked, in my functional but not perfect Russian, what they wanted, and what they were doing out at this time of night. I was caught off guard when they spoke to me in perfect English, and no Russian accent. At first I didn't get the strangeness of the situation. Then, it hit me. Shouldn't they have an accent? And how did they know how to speak English to me? That set off alarms in my head. What a strange coincidence that 2 seemingly American kids just so happened to knock on my door in an isolated Russian town that is the ass end of the world. What the hell? I decided to cautiously ask the friends what they wanted, and if they were American. One answered that she was Jessica, and the other identified herself as Sarah. I asked who they were, and Jessica said they were not anything other than our names. That was odd. I was lost for words, but other than the strange fact that they spoke perfect English and had American names, they didn't seem to set off any strange vibes. In other words, their mere presence didn't make me reel in fear. They excitedly asked me to come and play with them outside at 3 a.m. I know what some of you are thinking. Most people think of black-eyed children when they hear about kids knocking on the door late at night. However, there weren't any of the stereotypical black-eyed children nonsense where they are looking down and wearing old-fashioned clothes and trying to gain entry and exude a feeling of fear. I'm talking about 2 normal-looking kids with normal eyes who were wearing the latest fashions. I began to think that some American pals who live in Vladivostok must have cooked up some ridiculous April Fool's joke, only a few days late. I insisted that they tell me who initiated the joke. I said something along the lines of, "Haha, very funny. Whose idea was it? Dennis, George, Bobby?" Nothing but giggles in reply. I began to get pissed, rather than scared. They again insisted that I go to the adult park to play with them. This park is poorly lit, and at night it is best left alone. It's located on the outskirts of town, near the forest. I told them that it was too dangerous and that whoever put them up to this was taking it too far by placing them in real danger. This is not a safe town, especially after dark, so I genuinely was scared for their safety. I stood there, chatting with them until the angry old lady who lived next to my flat shouted at us to be quiet and then provided a few insults about Americans under her breath. After the lady slammed the door, one of the kids grabbed my arm. I felt a touch that burned like fire. As I looked down, I saw the evilest, wicked, twisted grin from the one they called Sarah. I saw the shadow and true embodiment of evil in that grin. It was at that moment that I felt true terror. I yanked my arm from its grasp and retreated into my apartment. I locked the door behind me, not thinking of unlocking it anymore. I looked through the peephole and they were gone, vanished without a trace. I then looked at the raw, burning handprint on my arm. That's when I knew I had encountered something out of the ordinary. This happens to other people, not to me, I thought to myself. I didn't sleep the rest of that night, and I didn't tell a soul. I still tremble when I think about this encounter with evil. Now, let's skip ahead to August of 2017. It was 4 months after the first encounter, so it was no longer at the front of my mind. I chalked it up to a nightmare, though I didn't explain the burn. I guess I had tried to rationalize it somehow. Anyway, I was back in Alabama visiting my parents for a few weeks during summer break, when I had another terrifying encounter with Jessica and Sarah. My parents have a nice home located in the middle of nowhere. It is surrounded by woods, but is still only a 10-minute drive from the nearest Walmart. Some years back, my dad built a little storage room behind the house for his junk, as my mother calls it. This room also doubles as his hobby shop and smoking room. It's connected to the main house by a short hallway. I had been playing Fallout 4 with my younger brother. He kept pissing me off, telling me how much I sucked at building settlements. It was late at night when I decided that I wanted to smoke, so we walked to my dad's room and I lit up. We were just smack-talking one another when we heard knocking and words come outside and play with us. The same voices from the Russian encounter. I thought to myself, no freaking way this is happening. The door had no peephole and had a bar to lock it. I decided just to creep over to the window and look out. They weren't by the door. They were right in front of the window, smiling friendly smiles and beckoning me to come play hide and seek with them and their friends in the woods. Those same little things that haunted me in Russia were now standing outside my parents' home in Alabama. I thought I was going mad. However, my brother witnessed it, which makes me feel better in a way. At least it wasn't in my head and I wasn't crazy. They begged and pleaded in sweet voices at first, but those degenerated into demands to come outside with them. I noped the hell back into the main house and poured a big glass of Jack on the rocks. The next day, I put a crucifix on each door and taped sheets of paper that had Jesus Christ written on them outside surface of the doors. 3 days later, I found extra writing on the papers. Nice try, Ed. I won't reveal my real name, but they wrote my name. I had never told them my name. How the hell did they know that? They were taunting me. I lived in fear for several weeks after that. But nothing more happened, so I eventually calmed down. In fact, nothing happened for over a year. I found a better apartment and moved in September of 2018. Skip ahead to November 13th of 2018. It was the 5th anniversary of the unexpected death of a dear friend of mine. She had died from a stroke when she was only 23. I was sitting in my apartment when I heard a sharp rapping on my balcony door. It is fully made of glass and the balcony is enclosed. The door was covered with a curtain, so I couldn't see out. I froze. That balcony is on the 3rd floor, with absolutely no access. You can't get to that place at all. Unless maybe you're Spider-Man. I crept slowly and pulled back the curtains. Lo and behold, there were those same little devils. Once again, they tried to lure me out. They mentioned my deceased friend and said that she was waiting in the park. The last time I had spoken to my friend before she died, I had just moved to Russia. This was back in 2013. 2 days after I last spoke to her, I got the news that she had suddenly passed. We had discussed her coming to Russia the next summer for a visit. These freaking kids said that she had finally kept her promise to come visit me, and it would be rude to keep her waiting. At this point, I lost my damned mind. I cried and begged God for protection, and shouted at them just to leave me alone. With a final, malicious giggle, they jumped from my 3rd floor window and were gone. On February 3rd of this year, I was walking late at night along a dark street. I had been enjoying my favorite Russian tradition of getting sloppy drunk with vodka at a friend's apartment and decided to walk back to that place rather than take a taxi. As I was walking past the Palace of Culture on the street behind it, I felt a tugging on my jacket. I thought I was getting mugged and spun around to fight whoever grabbed me. there stood those little devils smiling warmly and offering to accompany me home. I guess I had no choice in the matter. The funny thing is, they didn't try to lure me to the park or the forest. They simply began walking next to me asking why I was scared of them. I got to my apartment building, where they said goodnight and they would be back to visit. I asked them again what they wanted and who they were. They simply smiled, waved, and melted into the darkness. I live in Austria, Central Europe, and until I was 10 I lived in the city, but then I moved away to this little town near the city where the area is kind of rural. The train is only 15 minutes away, but it's like a 40-minute train ride to the city center, and there's a lot of fields and the infrastructure is lacking. My mom and I were kicked out of our apartment, and that's why we moved to my grandma's place, and now I've been living in this small rural town for 5 years. My family always had things for ghosts, so the paranormal experiences didn't start when we moved to the countryside. They started way before that, but that's a bit of a different story. The house has 2 floors and the living room is downstairs. The living room, the kitchen, and the dining room are all one room. There's a lot of windows and glass doors in that room, which is important for the story. So like I said, I kinda grew up with the belief that ghosts are real. And my family always used to say that I was very special because apparently I was able to see stuff not everyone else could. I know how dumb that sounds to you if you're not really into that kind of stuff, because it kind of sounded dumb to me too. Now that I'm typing it out, but it really is true. There's a lot of paranormal stories to tell, and I'll definitely tell a lot of them on here, but I've decided to choose this very specific story right now because it still haunts me, even when I think about it. So basically, it was the fall of 2011 if I recall correctly. Back then, I didn't completely live at my grandma's yet. I was at her place every weekend, but I still lived in the city, and at that point, my aunt and my grandma lived in that house by themselves most of the time. It was the weekend and my mom's boyfriend was there as well, because we wanted to see her. It was one of those weekends where the whole family was united. Prior to that day, a lot of really weird stuff had happened. For example, we had heard footsteps and loud bumping noises in the attic in the middle of the night, and the whole family tried to play it off as nothing because we were scared. Basically, on that evening, we were all sitting together at the dining table and were just talking. It was a typical horror movie setting. There was a storm outside and you could hear our wind chimes at the back door. It was like 8 at night, but I remember it so clearly. We were sitting there, and all of a sudden there was a knock on one of the glass doors, but the blinds were down so none of us could see which door exactly it was. My mom's boyfriend got up and opened the door, but no one was there. 5 minutes later, there was a knock on the back door and everyone got up from the table and ran to the back door. My grandma opened the door, and again, no one was there. Now, the most horrifying part. As we were all standing in the hallway, my mom noticed something on the floor. It was a trail of blood drops leading away from the door, and the creepiest part was, there was a bloody small handprint on the glass part of the back door. We still don't know what exactly it was. My family says that we probably had a poltergeist in the house at that point. What do you think? It still really freaks me out, and the fact that I still live in that house and that the paranormal stuff in this house still hasn't stopped isn't really helping. I'm from the middle of Europe. In my town, there is an old abandoned castle from the 1750s. After the Austro-Hungarian Empire, it was a hotel all the way up into the 1950s, and it has been abandoned ever since. It's not much of a tourist attraction as far as I know, but people do visit occasionally. Anyways, as kids, we experienced some weird stuff there, mostly in the basement. The interior of the castle was nothing special. There was always sunlight inside, nothing scary about that, but There are 2 main basements and a couple of hidden ones that are from the older generations. It's nothing special, just 2 or 3 small rooms that look like a place where you'd hide fancy booze back in the day, and then there's a tunnel that leads to another village. It was built strictly as an escape tunnel that is all blocked up by dirt and who knows what. So the history of the castle says a group of soldiers were escaping and the others just threw a ton of stuff on them and blocked them in. They were blocked 5 meters deep from both sides. This is still a long tunnel, about 2 kilometers. Nobody knew much about it before an army went to explore the tunnel around the 1960s, as my dad says. They found nothing and didn't go deeper than 150 meters before they got claustrophobic because the tunnel would start at 2 meters wide, and after 70 or 80 meters in, the tunnel was half the size and the air was tight. Another reason for not going deeper was they kept stumbling upon groups of bricks that fell out of the wall. During the late 90s, 2 homeless people died there, one in the basement and the other was drunk and probably fell down the stairs inside the castle. Anyway, it's scary to go down there alone on a sunny day, let alone at night. Tried it once and never again. I remember we used to explore down there before football practice. We would just wander around the castle, and after we got bored with it, we went down into the basement. Obviously, you need a flashlight or some kind of light, and if it dies, well, you can easily get lost in there and get paranoid very quickly and probably die of a panic attack. Older guys from my town messed around there too. They even broke the wall in the tunnel. They went there themselves, but no deeper than 10 to 20 steps because you start feeling the air pressure, and it stinks like 3 possums crawled in there and died and came back to life and took a dump and died again. It was open, like that for a couple of days back in the mid-2000s. Every single person that was inside said it was creepy, and you always felt like something or someone was all around you. Anyway, I and a couple of buds went in there. I can't describe that odd feeling of looking straight into the depth of the tunnel. Knowing it's 2 kilometers long, the longer you look, the more paranoid and nauseous you get. It's such a suffocating and anxious feeling. It's exactly like staring at the monster from Amnesia, the Dark Descent video game. Also because of the smell, you can be in there longer than a minute, or you'll probably choke. You simply need to get out to the fresh air before going back in again. One kid thought it was a good idea to run into the tunnel and see what more is beyond those 20 steps. I was there with many others, as it was popular for us teens and preteens to mess around that tunnel, knowing it will be cemented back in a matter of days. We saw the idiot run inside, and we obviously see the light moving as he does, but we can't see him. After probably 3 seconds of running, he was about 15 meters deep in the tunnel. The weird thing was seeing the light turn to us, and then the other way. He was doing that for a couple of seconds. It almost seemed like he was disoriented, even though there were only 2 ways to go. He started yelling that he's lost, but we barely heard him. Then quickly, he started screaming, and one of the older guys went in little to light the way. That helped him, and he started walking towards us before he just collapsed. He probably passed out from the smell and the pressure. When we got to him, he was so pale, and the weird thing was that he had this sort of stain on his shirt. It was a muddy stain, and it looked like someone hit him over the back with a large muddy log. The thing was, it was summer. Everything inside was dry, but maybe the tunnel was moist somewhere. We called an ambulance, but he woke up after a minute or two saying how bad it stinks, and he felt like someone was whispering to him. That's why he was turning around so often. He said he heard us talking to him, but this whisper was something else entirely. It creeps me out to this day. Was that his paranoia acting up? Was he imagining that due to the brain and air pressure? The tunnel was blocked the day after the incident by the city workers. I don't remember anyone entering the basement or tunnel anytime soon after that. Years later, we used to get drunk in the castle. We still visit the basement from time to time. What is weird to this day is how about 5 minutes in there, you can feel this sort of air creeping around your neck feeling, and you can feel the wind blowing inside. But on a normal day, when wind's blowing, you can't feel that. So where was it coming from? It feels like when someone is slowly exhaling behind you. I know it sounds like my buddies were messing around, but then I would totally hear and feel the person being behind me. It was so weird. It's like you can feel someone there, but they're not actually there. Besides, other people had felt that eerie feeling around their necks too. We got convinced by other people it was just the wind or hand movements that caused that. Simply because of the basement. It's cold and it's dark and it's natural to get a little paranoid in a space like that. I like to believe that's all it is, but I think we all know deep in our minds that it's not quite that simple. Thanks for listening to these allegedly true, creepy European ghost stories. Honestly, these were some doozies and had me feeling quite creeped out. If only you could see the goosebumps on my arms right now. There's just something about a classic ghost story that just gives me goosebumps every single time. Something about the unknown of the afterlife, I guess. If you guys have a story you would like to share, be sure to send it in at swampdweller.net or the email you can find in the description down below. I would love to share your story with everyone here in the swamp. It's stories like yours that keep this channel going, and I appreciate every single one of you. If you guys haven't, please check out my friend Celestial Noor. He helped me out big time by reading story number 2. If you enjoyed his voice and his storytelling skills, be sure to subscribe to his channel. The link to that is also in the description down below. Now, I'll see you guys soon with another creepy video.